Hello and welcome to SAP Learning Academy and welcome to this tutorial. In this tutorial, I will be talking about what is data tiering in SAP HANA, and also I'll be talking about the purpose behind this concept of data tiering, and also I'll be talking about with an architecture, with a diagram explaining how the data is stored in SAP HANA and also the data tiering options available in SAP HANA. So let me begin with the first slide. So here I will be talking about the purpose. So it is important to know the purpose behind this data tiering. Let me tell you with a concept of data SAP HANA database. Suppose you are using SAP HANA in your company and if the data grows each and every day, meaning that your company is accumulating all the data into one database, then there will be a problem, like you need to keep a huge memory of SAP HANA, and that will be costly because if we look at the architecture or concept of SAP HANA, that SAP HANA is an in-memory database, meaning that you have to keep all the data in your RAM, and that is costly. But if you keep your older data, meaning that those are not required for the business, those are not business critical, if you keep those data into a different space, it might be your something not in HANA, or maybe in HANA but in a disk storage, then the cost can be, your cost optimization can be done on the database side, and also your data can be stored separately into a different layers. So that's the concept of data tiering. So the first point comes here, I have written in the slide, the storing your data into different level, because that we don't need to keep all the data into a same place, then you need a huge database. So storing the data into different level. So the second point comes that depends on multi-layer temperature architecture. Yes, the data tiering follows the multi-layer temperature architecture, meaning that here we have three layers, and that I will be discussing in the next slide, and also the next point as well, reducing of memory footprint and database footprint. So how this memory footprint and database footprint is done in data tiering. So let me explain in the next slide. So this is the main slide explaining about this tutorial. So I'll be first talking about the architecture, meaning that how this data looks like in SAP HANA database, and this memory footprint and the database footprint, and the last I'll be talking about the data tiering options. Suppose if you look at this pyramid, so if you consider this is a whole your SAP HANA workspace, and your data, the most business critical data is stored in the SAP at the top level. So that's called the hot data, meaning that it is a business critical data, it is needed every day, so you have to keep that data into your in memory or in RAM, because the CPU operation is very less. Whenever any kind of task or any kind of request is done on the hot data, then the RAM can actually provide the data very fast, because you don't need to keep there's not much operation with the CPU, so the data can be actually fetched very fast. Next we have the warm data, so meaning that when you don't need if the data which is not needed every day, or it may be required, if I talk about monthly or something, so those data you can actually keep into your warm data, because you don't need every day but you might require based on the requirement, so you can keep those data into warm space, and it is a disk storage. It is not in memory, it is a disk storage, so you can actually keep more data into warm data. Now the last one is the cold data. So cold data meaning that you generally don't need the data, and based on the requirement, if there are some specific requirement to do some kind of analytics on the historical data, so you can actually take the data from your cold data. So cold data generally a read only, so if we want to write something, then we have to keep the data into hot data. We have to keep the data into HANA memory, then write the data and again put it back to the cold data. But warm data and hot data is always read and write mode. So now it is time to understand the memory footprint. Like what is memory footprint and database footprint? So the memory footprint comes with the warm storage. So if we apply this data tiering option, then this memory footprint actually meaning that so we are not keeping all the data into this into the memory RAM. We are actually putting the data into a different storage, but that is within the SAP HANA, and it is a disk storage. So your overall memory will be reduced using these options. And the last one is the cold. So this database footprint actually comes with this cold storage, meaning that uh, cold storage is always a separate physical storage. It is not within SAP HANA. It is a different uh, set of you know set of database. So it can be Hadoop, it can be NLS IQ. So you can actually keep those data into cold storage. So your overall database can be reduced. So you warm data using this warm data technologies, so you can reduce the memory footprint, and using the cold, you can actually reduce the database footprint. Now the last part we have this here, the data tiering options. So for the hot data, so there are two technologies provided by SAP. One is the DRAM and the PRAM. D means dynamic RAM and P is the persistent RAM. So initially SAP came up with DRAM technologies. So now we have these new technologies, that is the PRAM, persistent RAM, meaning it is a non-volatile memory, meaning that there can be some, if the server goes down, then some data still can be kept in the RAM. So it is a kind of a different storage capability than the DRAM. Next we have this worm. In the worm data tiering we have three options now. Earlier on SAP started with dynamic tiering. Next SAP came up with extension node. So dynamic tiering is about extension of NLS IQ, is IQ based technologies, but it has a good features. So that's why we can keep the warm data, but still there are some features missing. So SAP came up with another concept of extension node. So here we can actually keep a different node or different storage where we can keep the data. But when we come with NSE, it is a new concept came in SAP BW for HANA. So here it is a native storage extension. So here some more features are added than extension node, that we can actually keep some cache memory in these technologies, and we can keep the main data into your disk storage. So there are actually good compatibility between the SAP HANA and the disk storage. Now the last one came with this cold storage. Those are the NLS IQ, and those who are working on SAP warehouse technologies, so you must be relevant about this. And the second one, the ILM IQ, it is related to the S4. If you have the S4 SAP S4HANA in the database in the source, then you can use this one. And also we have these other technologies like Hadoop. Also we can actually integrate Hadoop in the cold data storage. So that's all about this tutorial, and I tried to explain everything in the data tiering, like how the data tiering looks like in terms of data distribution, and what are the options for data tiering, and what are the memory footprint and database footprint in SAP HANA. So thank you for watching this tutorial, and also look into the other tutorial. I have given the links in the below description. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.